In the 19th century, several gold rushes were happening in many countries, one of which was specifically near the city of Bermagui, Australia, in which a government geologist, Lamont Young, was sent from Sydney to do some research in this region, together with his assistant Maximilian Schneider. On Sunday, October 10, 1880, Young and Schneider left on an expedition with 3 more fishermen. It's said that their boat was seen leaving the city at about 9 am. At 4 pm of the same day, their boat was found with a lot of belongings of the group on a beach 12 kilometers away from Bermagui. On the coast nearby there was food, as if they had stopped and eaten there. The only problem is that the crew of the boat was never seen again, neither alive nor dead. At the scene, there was no conclusive evidence of murder, drowning, kidnapping, nothing. This case became known as one of the biggest mysteries from Australia, the Bermagui Mystery. On September 17, 1880, a Canadian from Montreal ended up finding gold on Australia's coast, close to the city of Bermagui. As the days went by, other people were also finding it, and within 3 weeks there were already about 2,000 men working the region, which became known as Montreal. Among the ones who went to try their luck in this gold camp, there were 3 fishermen from the city of Batemans Bay that arrived on October 7th on Bermagui: Daniel Casey, Thomas Towers, and William Lloyd. And because of all the commotion, a British geologist, Lamont Young, and his German assistant, Maximilian Schneider, were sent from Sydney by the government to do research and reports on this gold digging area. They arrived in Bermagui on a Friday, October 8th, and set up a camp near the entrance of the Bermagui River, where the fishermen were also staying. The next day, Young went to Montreal and spent some time with several gold miners and policemen who were there, 2 of which were the senior constable John Barry and magistrate Henry Catley. Young talked with some of them about his desire to go to Montague Island and his desire to go to Corunna Point Beach, with the purpose of researching these places and wanting to tour around there as well. Among the conversations, Young agreed to go fishing in the afternoon of the next day with Barry and some other policemen, in case he didn't go to lunch with one acquaintance of his, Mr. Hobbs. He also delivered some introductory letters from the mining department to Catley, as he was the director of the gold fields. Catley asked where Young was camping, and when he heard the answer, he asked Young to bring the camp closer to him in Montreal to be easier to do research and not having to travel a few kilometers every day. Young went back to his camp in Bermagui around 4 pm, and this was supposedly his last conversation with confirmed witnesses. From there, it is assumed that on Saturday night, Young and Schneider talked with fishermen and made an agreement to go towards Corunna Point in the morning of the next day. People saw their boat leaving the Bermagui River between 8 and 10 am on Sunday, but because of the boat sail blocking the view and the distance it was, it is not confirmed how many men were seen on the boat. Some say 4, others say 5, or even 6 people sighted. Hours later, around 4 pm, a man named Johnson was riding a horse near the coast of Corunna Point when he found a stranded boat on some rocks. He checked nearby, but decided to not touch anything and call someone who lived in the area, Albert Reed. The 2 returned to the scene, and Reed took with him a geology book that they found in the back of the boat. In that book was wrote a name, Lamont Young. Reed went to Montreal on Monday morning to tell Constable Barry what he saw, and showed the book with the Young's name on it. Then Barry ordered to call the magistrate Catley, and both went investigate. Over the days, weeks and years, Barry, Catley and others, whether police officers or not, had the opportunity to look for clues around the place. In this way, we got the following information about the case. The 7-meter-long boat was stranded on a reef about 36 meters from the coast, with 2 large holes, one of 91 centimeters long in the back, and another one of 121 centimeters in the middle of the right of the boat. A man named Francis Guy, who was in the area at the time, managed to get a look at the boat and said that the holes were damaged from the inside out. But this is unconfirmed. Inside the boat there were 5 stones ranging from 18 to 31 kilograms on the left side of it, which were taken from nearby and placed after it had already stopped. These stones could have been used as a ballast, which in short is a way to balance a boat. The problem is that according to Daily Telegraph newspaper, the 3 fishermen left their town without stones in the boat to use as ballast, so it would be hardly necessary if there were 2 extra men in it, Young and Schneider. According to the captain of the Marine, Jonathan Solomon, the boat was guided by someone to where it was located, because otherwise it would be destroyed by the impact with the rocks, and also Solomon says it was the most eligible spot near for landing. The group's belongings that they had on the boat were a 50-kilogram potato bushel bag from the fisherman, and other bushel bags that contained various scientific books and Young's private documents, which were strangely mixed with the crew's clothing and boots. It was said by many that Young would never let his stuff get mixed like that in normal situations. Besides that, there was an almanac, which basically is a calendar with a few extra things, and a calculating notebook, both in German, which must have belonged to Schneider. Other things said to be of his were glasses and a coat. There was also a compass, lines as if people were fishing, and 2 oars tied. And Gately said that he saw signs that a person was sick in front of the boat, without specifying what it was. A few newspapers said it was vomit. One of the contradictions regarding the investigation is that the officer Thomas Binney said in 1880 that it was found a small piece of the sail and a tent that supposedly belonged to Young. However, the sub-inspector Robert Hannan in 1883 contradicted this, saying that Young's tent and the sail were missing. The fact that he found a part of the sail or none of it doesn't change much in the case. But in relation specifically of the tent, Constable Barry said he never saw the camp from Young, but he knew from Young himself that it would be on the southern side of the Bermagui River. The problem is that Gately claims that this is wrong. The only thing that is known for sure is that the exact location of the camp has never been found. Even if this tent was on the boat, they didn't even find one trace of the camp. There were also missing from the boat a small 20 kilograms anchor and meters of rope, including the one used on the sail. Other stuffs that were found that brought discussion were some firearm bullets. One of them was sunk in the boat's knee, and it is precisely this that makes the investigations contradict each other a lot. Gately said that the bullet never could have been fired from a firearm, because it was found with a crack in the paint, and had the opinion that this shows that it was placed there by someone trying to turn it in a sinker. On the other side, the police sub-inspector, Keegan, didn't think that the bullet was placed there by any means, but rather was shot from a distance or passed through an object. And another unidentified person from Ilawaha Mercury newspaper also supports this version, since a direct contradiction to it being placed there by someone would be that it was stuck in a way that the side of the bullet that was outside of the knee, which should have been hit with something heavy to be placed there, has no marks. One thing that supports Gately is that no gunshots were reported by those who live in the area, according to some newspapers. Also, no blood stains were found. Of the other 2 bullets found, one was at the bottom of the boat and the other at the edge of the beach. Gately kept his line of thought that they were used for the same purpose, in fishing. The rest didn't say anything about these other 2. The person from Ilawaha newspaper mentions that I have not seen them, since it was in possession of the police. Other things that were on the edge of the beat were a shovel and an axe said to belong to the fishermen. In some bushes nearby there was a bottle of honey and a butter can, not fully consumed. There was also a piece of bread, a damper, which is basically a traditional Australian bread, a few studs said to be similar to a t-shirt on the boat, 3 cigar ends and a cigar holder, apparently from Young. plus a smoking pipe from Schneider. The problem is that the food appeared to have been thrown away, as if it was no longer of use, something that would be extremely unusual for people like them to do. The Sydney's Daily Telegraph newspaper mentioned at the time that the fishermen wouldn't throw away half-consumed provisions, but rather they would put them away for use at the next time. No poison was found in the food, no sign of fight in the scene, none of that. A while later, this beach at Corunna Point started to be called Mystery Bay, since whatever happened to Young's group is something that left only a sea of theories. Many theories appeared as to what really happened on that Sunday. Being the first thought of the majority and one of the most cogitated is that they would have drowned when re-embarking after have eaten. But a lot of things go in the opposite direction of this. The distance between the coast of the beach and the reef, where the boat was only about 36 meters and everyone in the group knew how to swim. With the only thing that could get in the way was the amount of kelp that could end up getting stuck in their feet, making it unlikely that all 5 drowned at once. Even if this happened, the probability that none of the 5 bodies were washed up to the shore of the beach or are found anywhere else, either a few days after the tragedy or months later, it's extremely improbable. Kilometers and kilometers of the coast and sea were investigated by a lot of people, even arriving in other cities in case their bodies had been carried away by the current. But they didn't find any trace, not even a piece of clothing enough to prove that it belonged to someone from the group. They even blew up dynamite in the water to try bring something to the surface, and again, no results. Corpses after some time at the bottom of the sea have a high chance of floating, but even after days, weeks, months, nothing had turned up. Another theory that appeared was that they got lost in the forest and ended up dying, for example, of starvation. But again, several things point to the opposite. First of all, according to Sub-Inspector Renn, the locality is a populous one, that is, with people who live around the place and demarcated paths, making it difficult for the 5 to get lost and none of them managed to bring the others back to the beach. Second, according to a person called Alexander Gray from the mining department as well, who declares to know perfectly well Young zapped in the forest, he could not have lost himself. Even if against all odds this happened, they would have left some trace that they had passed through there, and or the bodies would have been found by one of the many search parties that looked for them in the woods, which was not the case, causing this theory to be discarded as well. And like the other theories, it doesn't explain the holes made in the boat, nor the things that disappeared, like the ropes. A third theory involves the fact that at the time, because of the lack of a full crew on the ship, sailors kidnapped people by drugging them, using strength, threat, or any trick that forced the person to be on the ship. So since there was a new gold rush going around Montreal, sailors could end up deserting and go in search of the gold, perhaps causing ships to do this type of kidnapping, and the Young's group would have been a target of that. This is a theory that has been supported by the London police, but according to Sub-Inspector Renn, could make sense if Australia were peopled by Malays, as nothing of the sort has been known to have taken place in the history of Australia, and what he preferred to believe that they were devoured by the Australian bunnyhip, which is a mythological monster from Australia, since one theory would be as true as the other. And in fact, he's wrong. This specific type of kidnapping, forced labor on ships, is known by the term of crimp or Shanghai, and there are articles that prove the existence of this in Australia since the beginning of the 19th century, and this practice only began to decline in the early of 20th century. So apart from these opinions from Renn, who was super angry with this theory supported by the London police, it would be very difficult for 5 men to have been taken by force without leaving a single mark of violence, and there's no sign that they were somehow drugged. Like the other theories, assuming that this happened, the people who were kidnapped by these sailors were not necessarily killed by them, but taken to other countries. So posters were sent to foreign courts asking if anyone had any information about the Young's group, and, if anyone did, a reward of £300 would be delivered. Following the standard, nothing was reported. And that's how over time, what many would not like to believe became more and more likely. They were victims of murder. Soon after the party disappeared, several information about the five appeared in the newspapers. All of them were said to be gentlemen, honest and respected, so there was no reason for any disagreement to have occurred that would result in one or more of them to have done something against the others. So in the search for what would be the motivations for someone to commit the murder, the first of them could be that they were looking for a good amount of money or gold that the group could have in possession. According to Lloyd's wife, he left Bateman's Bay with 19 pounds, and Tower's wife said he left with less than 1 pound. Casey had nothing. There was no confirmation to what the other two had. Some even say that the young was carrying 40 pounds, a valuable chain and watch, but this was said to be unsubstantiated. Furthermore, even if this amount were doubled, a newspaper at the time said that it would be very difficult to imagine that someone would commit such a crime for so paltry of a sum. But it must be reminded that there were thousands of men in the region in search of gold. It is also difficult to imagine that everyone there was of good nature, so it is supposed that someone there thought that Young, for being someone of high reputation sent by the government, could have a good amount of goods or even be a gold buyer. So, it is assumed that on the Saturday night, Young and Schneider talked with the fishermen and made an agreement to go towards Corona Point in the morning of the next day. A while later, a group of strangers also talked to the fishermen, and they ended up revealing that they would make this trip with Young. Because of that, at some point in the late of the night, with the hope of finding something valuable, this group killed both Young and Schneider completely in cold blood while they slept in their camp. But they didn't find any gold. Then, thinking that the boat's preparations were already ready to go towards Corona Point and that there was gold there, in addition to now needing to eliminate any witnesses and also a method of escape by sea, they went after the fishermen and cowardly killed them. In the search for something valuable, they messed up with the Young's things and ended up piling all of his documents with several clothes in a bag. But in the end they got only 19 pounds that Lloyd had. On this, they needed to get rid of the bodies, and they did it by burying them on the coast somewhere in the Bermagui River. They also disappeared with Young's camp since it was never found the exact location of where it was. To make their escape, they took Tower's boat in the Sunday morning when everything was clear, and set out to Corona Point, and this group of murderers were the ones seen leaving Bermagui. Arriving there, they landed the boat on the reef, did the holes, placed heavy stones to try to sink the boat, and threw the food along the shore to pretend it was Young's group that had a meal there. All of that to try to confuse who would investigate the place, and then fled to some other city. Or there's also a version that says they got rid of the bodies in the sea, tying them to the sail that had disappeared, and sinking them with the stones and the anchor which also disappeared. The group that was accused of having done this would be one led by a no-murderer named Joseph Sullivan, who, in short, was a guy that in 1866 killed 5 people with 3 more friends in New Zealand. They became well known as the Maungatapu Murders. Sullivan ended up turning over his friends, and because of that he was released years later, but the friends were executed. Even so, many people wanted the death of Sullivan as a form of justice, and his last reported location confirmed was Australia in 1876, 4 years before this Bermagui Mystery. The reason they accused his involvement in that Bermagui case is because, supposedly, gold miners said that they saw him in the gold fields 3 days before Young's group disappeared. Some people went after the man who would be Sullivan, but he might have hid in the forest after discovering they recognized him. So he went near the Bermagui River, knowing that there would be just a few people there, since most of them were in Montreal, and then he committed the murder. In other words, the whole accusation of being Sullivan is based on the rumors that people saw him. The Daily Telegraph newspaper objected to this theory because this rumor came out of nowhere and reached a pitch of exaggeration that was simply ridiculous, as the terror caused by Sullivan's sighting even reached a nearby town, Cobargo, where the residents barricaded their doors and windows with furniture out of fear, and the man asked for a room in a hotel because he was being chased by people after saying he looked like Sullivan, giving an idea of how far people's hysteria was getting. And the information that Sullivan was with his friends who helped him is completely speculative and based on nothing. Despite this theory doesn't necessarily need to involve Sullivan, because it could be any malicious group. And now we can mention some of its inconsistencies. First, unless it was Sullivan himself, who needed to leave the region by sea to not be recognized by someone while walking, any other group wouldn't need to use the boat, and would just live through the woods as if nothing had happened. As always, assuming they did that, waiting until 9 PM would also be strange in any situation. Perhaps it was because of the time to go bury the bodies, come back and wait for an opportunity to get out without being seen. If so, the possibility of the bodies have been thrown to the bottom of the sea, tied to the sail with something heavy is ruled out. But this doesn't explain why the boat was without the ropes, without the anchor and its sail, or at least the most of it. And we have to remember that they also looked for the bodies in the Bermagui River, and none of them was found. Second, in their theory part of what they did at Corona Point, considering that the holes in the boat were really made from the inside out, with the objective of sinking the boat or pretending a shipwreck, they could have just turned over the boat on the rocks or in the sea. And by the way, there's not even a single proof that supports the fact that it wasn't Young's group that left Bermagui. The closest thing to that would be the disappearance of the camp. There are two pieces of information given by a man named Milton shortly after the tragedy, where he says that a boy overheard the Young talking to Towers about fishing just before they left Bermagui, and a man named John Ross who saw Young's group fishing while returning from Montague Island. But neither the time nor the exact place he saw them was mentioned. The biggest problem is that these finds were never confirmed and were cited a few times by other newspapers. Of those few, one of them was to say that a man named Campy Bell, who was on the boat with John Ross, denies that this happened when questioned by the police, and the boy's information was cited only once in all the years of newspapers that I researched. In addition to this main theory of murder and some versions of it, many accusations were made during 10, 20, 30, 40 years after the tragedy happened, most without any foundation. Even the 3 fishermen who went with Young were accused, but the person who received the most attempts to be incriminated from several different officials and sources was Maximilian Schneider. Schneider in the first months after the tragedy was always mentioned as someone who had a good academic education, hardworking, respected by those who knew him, and a person who went to Bermagui as an assistant to research the region because of Young's special request, since they had met each other a while before. Years went by, and for some reason the narrative changed. Newspapers began to publish information that completely contradicted this. Schneider was unpopular among his fellow clerks in the government survey. Young was disgusted to find that Schneider was allotted to him as aid. It was said that he had stolen 50 pounds from Young, illegally pawned government instruments, and it was even claimed that Schneider was not part of the lost group because of total absence of any of his belongings, even though it was reported repeatedly around this time that Schneider's stuff was found on the boat. And among many people who came up to give their alleged reports related to the disappearance of Young's group, one of them was Charles Jaggers. This man said that Schneider and another person had breakfast at his house on Sunday morning when the tragedy happened, and then at 7 o'clock in the morning of another day, his dogs showed up at the house smelling of human flesh, as they had been eating dead bodies all night, indicating obviously that it would have been the bodies of the disappeared party. But the story of the dogs was only told by Jaggers sometime after he spoke about the story they had eaten at his house, as if he had shaping his narrative over the months. He was also asked by Sub-Inspector Renn to confirm this story, but got nothing out of him. Another report, not necessarily related to Schneider, was that of a young woman named Thompson, who said that the day before the group disappeared, she and her daughter saw a great blaze, as if an explosion had taken place, and shortly afterwards they heard screams and groans of 3 people coming from the surroundings of where Young was supposedly camping. The problem with this report, besides saying that there was a fucking explosion, is that there were definitely more people in this region who could have seen or heard these things, but no one else said anything or it wasn't reported by the newspapers. Even though only she and her daughter heard all of this, there is no reason for this report to only appear years later. And it gets even more absurd. People have appeared in the newspapers claiming they had a vision of what really had happened in the case while dreaming. A woman who said that her husband lived in Bermagui and the next of his threatened the guy to come back to her, otherwise she would tell the police. Or even members of parliament who accompanied a clairvoyant who tried to use of his paranormal to try to complete the case. It's conceivable that these people start to come up with dubious information motivated by the reward which the government was offering. £50 if the person could prove what the fate of the 5 was, and they would obtain 150 more if they proved that it was someone who murdered any of them. Combining all of these waves of misinformation that were published without the slightest responsibility with the contradictions, disorganization, and inefficiency of the investigations is what really disturbed the entire resolution of the mystery. No one could come to a consensus on what really had happened. Magistrate Catley believed that they drowned, but Schneider was in the boat with them, and when General Inspector Fosbury said he had no reason to believe in that would be the reason, and said that if there was a Constable Martin had the opinion that they all but didn't know how. Everyone had their different explanations for a mystery that was inexplicable.